If you talk to veterans or read frontline diaries from the Second World War, one truth appears again and again. Soldiers were rarely as well equipped as the movies suggest. Weapons broke, ammunition ran out, supply lines collapsed. Units were isolated for days or weeks. In those moments, survival depended not on official gear, but on imagination, mechanical sense, and the ability to turn ordinary objects into tools of defense. In frozen forests, flooded fields, ruined cities, and desert outposts, men learned very quickly that waiting for resupply could mean death. So they improvised, they modified, they adapted. They turned wire, cans, cloth, wood, grease and scrap metal into practical fighting tools. These were not gimmicks. They were battlefield-tested solutions passed quietly from squad to squad. In this guide, we are going to walk through the real-world weapon hacks and combat adaptations soldiers created using everyday materials. More importantly, we will examine why they worked, how they were built, and what modern survivalists and history-minded people can still learn from them today. Combat units in WWIIs often operated far from reliable supply depots. In North Africa, entire convoys disappeared. In the Pacific, jungle fighting made airdrops unreliable. On the Eastern Front, winter storms cut rail lines for weeks. In Western Europe, fast-moving offensives outran logistics. When this happened, soldiers became mechanics, blacksmiths, and inventors. A rifle that malfunctioned could not be replaced easily. A grenade shortage meant no clearing of bunkers. A broken bayonet might mean no close-quarters option. Men began carrying small kits of scavenged parts. Wire from fences, cloth from tents, springs from wrecked vehicles, and metal from abandoned buildings became raw materials. For modern readers, this shows an important lesson. Equipment matters, but adaptability matters more. One of the most common battlefield improvisations, involved turning empty ration cans into makeshift explosive devices. Soldiers would pack them with scavenged explosives, powder from damaged shells, or salvaged grenade filler. They filled the container with nails, wire fragments, ball bearings, or broken metal, basically anything sharp they could find. A simple fuse made from cord soaked in grease or oil created a timed device. When detonated, these crude devices produced deadly shrapnel. In urban fighting, especially in Italy and Germany, these improvised charges were used in stairwells, tunnels and doorways. They were simple, brutal and, effective. From a historical standpoint, this really reflects how soldiers understood fragmentation physics without any formal training. They knew sharp metal flying at high speed was what caused casualties. Everything else was honestly secondary. For modern preparedness, this teaches the principle of understanding basic mechanics rather than relying on pre-made tools. Standard grenades scattered fragments in all directions. In close quarters, this was dangerous for friendly troops. Soldiers learned to modify grenades by wrapping them in cloth, socks, or canvas filled with sand or dirt. This absorbed rearward fragments and forced most of the blast forward. It created a crude directional charge. In trench assaults and bunker clearing, this reduced risk to the thrower and nearby allies. Some units tied the wrapped grenade to sticks or poles to extend reach in confined spaces. Others wedged them into cracks and openings to maximize forward blast. Right, so this practice shows how soldiers use simple materials to control energy. They did not change the explosive, you see. Instead, they changed how it behaved. These days, the lesson applies to any tool, really. Control and placement often matter more than raw power. Booby traps were common on every front, you know. Soldiers often built simple trip-trigger systems using wire, string and salvage springs. They attached these to grenades, flares or explosives. A door opening, a footstep, or even just a brush movement could trigger detonation. In defensive positions, this sort of thing slowed enemy advances and, well, bought precious time. In Normandy, hedgerows and Pacific jungles, these traps were especially effective. Visibility was poor and movement was restricted. Improvised triggers multiplied defensive strength without additional manpower. Construction was straightforward. A tension line, a pressure point, and a release mechanism. Any mechanically minded soldier could build one in minutes. This reflects the importance of mechanical literacy. Understanding leverage, tension, and release mechanisms gave soldiers enormous defensive advantages. Not all weapon hacks involved explosives. Many focused on concealment and surprise. Soldiers mixed grease with soot or charcoal to create camouflage paste. This reduced facial shine and glare. Some units coated weapon barrels with mud and ash to dull reflections. Others used oil mixed with dirt to waterproof rifle actions in wet conditions. Chemical improvisation also extended to smoke. Burning certain materials created thick visual cover. Rubber, oil-soaked cloth and treated wood were used to create instant smoke screens during withdrawals. For modern survivalists, this shows that concealment is as important as firepower. In partisan warfare and resistance movements, access to firearms was limited. Civilians and irregular fighters turned farm tools into weapons. Shovels were sharpened, pitchforks reinforced, hammers weighted. In occupied Europe and parts of Asia, kitchen knives were modified into fighting blades. Metal files shaped spear points. Bicycle chains became flexible striking weapons. These were not ideal, but they worked when nothing else was available. Training focused on ambush, surprise, and rapid disengagement. This really demonstrates that weapon effectiveness often depends more on tactics than technology. Studying historical improvisation is not about copying weapons. It's about understanding problem-solving under pressure. The men who created these hacks were responding to extreme circumstances. For modern viewers, the practical takeaway is learning basic mechanics, materials science, and field repair skills. Knowing how to reinforce, adapt, and repurpose tools can apply to camping, emergency preparedness, or disaster response. Learning how systems work makes you less dependent on fragile supply chains. That really is the real legacy of these wartime innovations. The unusual weapon hacks of the Second World War were not acts of recklessness. They were, in fact, expressions of discipline, intelligence, and determination. Ordinary men, placed in extraordinary situations, refused to be helpless. They studied their environment, learned from failures, and shared successful ideas quietly and quickly. In doing so, they created a culture of resilience that kept units alive. For history enthusiasts and survival-minded viewers, these stories are reminders that technology changes, but human ingenuity does not. The ability to adapt, repair, and improvise remains one of the most valuable skills any generation can possess. If you found this guide valuable, take a moment to subscribe to the channel for more in-depth Second World War history and practical survival knowledge. Share this video with friends who care about real-world skills and forgotten lessons from the past. Together, we keep this knowledge alive.